Welcome, everyone. I'm Jeremy Vine. I'm chairing the Community Care Live question time with our very distinguished panel, and it's great to be here. So, the first question is this. What do people think about the revelation, which was in the 1st of May edition of Community Care, which I know you will have seen, that the government has failed to act on key recommendations of a £2 million action plan to reduce violence against social care staff? Do people think this issue needs to be re-examined given the recent murder of the Lancashire social worker Philip Ellison? Naomi Eisenstadt, what do you say?
I think it's a shame the government has failed to act. I think it's an extremely serious issue. I think it's an issue for social care and for the NHS. And I think that all public sector staff have a right to work without fear of being attacked. The nature of the families and the clients that we work with means that we are at risk. And I think that we have to do more to manage that risk.
Well, Mark Ivory, you were the one who revealed this and campaigned for it. What did you want the government to do?
Well, we wanted them to take the issue seriously, and we wanted them to exhort local authorities and other employers to take the issue seriously. There is a question of the way in which people are trained, the support that people receive from their managers, and the way in which the government funds and encourages employers to take this issue seriously. And frankly, over the last 10 years, we haven't seen much sign of that.
Sean Bailey?
For me, it would be easy to beat the government up and, yeah, they failed and all the rest of that, but there's the practical end of it. What can social workers and anybody working in this arena do about it from a policy point of view? But I'd suggest if you want anything done about it, you've got to make it cost. So if you've got any kind of union and one of you are hurt or wounded and you make your employer have to pay up, you'll soon see action. It's as simple as that. If you want something done, you make them pay up and you see them jump to attention, because ultimately the bill will go back to the government, so it'll make them set up and pay attention. So
what, you take legal action to accommodate the danger?
One heavy go through the courts with somebody in a social work environment somewhere in this country where you win to show the government that A, you're at risk and you need defending, and B, if you are not defended, your professional group and your unions will take that seriously and get a payout, and they will do something about it because they don't want to continue to pay out.
But I actually think the question is broader than what we've started to address here, which is what is the role of social work? And what's the future of social work in this country? How does society see social work? Is social work respected? And I guess it's come home to us recently, over recent years, with the need for overseas recruitment, which we've all been through. And there are a number of overseas workers working in the UK system now who are shocked and dismayed by the profile of social work in this country and the lack of respect that it gets. And that's an issue for politicians, media, society, the whole lot. But I do think there is still a gap around training, and I think there's probably more of a gap in fieldwork services than residential services, where there's a high emphasis on keeping staff safe, on diffusion techniques, on negotiation skills.
Why is it, when there are so many black workers on the front line, particularly in the domiciliary care and housing sector, there are so few black managers? Sean Bailey, do you mind if I start with you?
Yeah, why not? I don't know. I don't want to go down the whole race route and inflame people, but there is some issue around that. I'm a youth worker by trade, and we have exactly the same situation. I think somebody somewhere along the line has to be brave and bite the bullet and encourage people to come in, because so-called affirmative action has issues. It means that people are looked at as second-class citizens, and I, particularly as a black man, don't want to be involved in anything where people can say I'm just there because I'm black and not because of the skill level I have, because I find that offensive and patronising. So I think a local authority who are looking to address this situation would just have to bite the bullet and say we're going to seek black people to train. The police did it, the army did it. I don't see why social work can't do it. You could just say we're not having you in if you don't make the grade, but we'll have you in initially and seek to support you to make the grade. And that way you sort of, for me, you can't expect black people to get involved by osmosis. It's not going to happen through goodwill. But also you can't just place them in that situation and expect them to perform. But
the question is why, Howard, why so few black managers?
Sorry, just answer that. Because the world is run by white, middle-class, middle-aged men. That's obvious. Everybody knows that.
Okay. All right. Howard. And I'm not wearing a tie, by the way.
Spot the difference. Isn't it? I really can't add to that. That was really exactly what the issue is. There is a ceiling there. No matter how much we think there isn't, there is a ceiling. And
But who's put it? Well, let's just all try and work out who's put it there and why it's there.
I think it's been structurally designed years ago, and nobody's really broken it down. And the attempts that have been made have not really impacted to the level that we would have expected. I've worked in many authorities that have got their black workers groups, they've got their workers, their women's groups, and it isn't impacted on the change that the question is looking for.
Mark Ivory, Executive Editor, Community Care. Tell us why there are so few black managers.
I'm not sure that I've got the answer off pat, but I take heart from one thing. If I may make the comparison is often made with women and their situation as far as rising into the management hierarchy is concerned. Adult social services directors used to be very male-dominated. They still are male-dominated, but less so, much less so than was the case. I remember probably in the late 90s sometimes we thought it was a great thing when a third of all London directors were women. Now I understand that that's a third of all adult social services directors across the country. So that must be progress of a sort. Clearly we haven't gone far enough, but it shows that progress is possible. And I think it's absolutely the case with black managers too. Progress is possible,
Okay,
but the mechanisms have to be there.
All right, thank you. But now, is the comparison with women apt? Sue Bott, progress with women, therefore progress in due course with people of colour?
Well, I'm not necessarily sure that it follows. And if you can bear with me, I can only relate this question really to my own personal experience as a disabled person to try and unlock the key there, because I think there are some connections there. I mean, I remember going for a management post in social services in an authority that will remain nameless, and I was told, well, you'd be very good in the voluntary sector in a kind of campaigning role, but I don't think that you'd be very suitable as a manager. And I think that we've got to look beyond these equal opportunities policies and the monitoring, because the monitoring actually means nothing. All you do is collect the statistics. I think it comes back to thinking about recruitment and being real about what happens. And what happens is that when social care wants to appoint a manager to a post, then who do you ask? Who do you ask to draw up the person specification and the job description? Well, you ask an existing social care manager, don't you? And so it becomes self-perpetuating, really. And I think in all roles in social care, there needs to be a completely fresh look, so as to include diversity and to have a diverse workforce. And just quickly, another point that I would make is that often when it gets to applying for a management position, people have to undertake a psychometric test. That's the kind of buzz thing that people have to do. Well, the research indicates that these psychometric tests are done really to test how middle class, white and male you are. So we really need to ditch those, I think.
Never knew that. Thank you. Anyone? Okay, thank you. Thank you. Anybody else on this before we move on to yes, over here, waving madly in a good way.
Yes, surely it should be on somebody's ability to do the job, and to secondary, non-existent should be their sexuality, their gender, or their colour. And, you know, I just sort of think that, first and foremost, if people were sort of interviewed and those things weren't known, and then you would select somebody on the technical ability to do the job, and then, you know, whatever colour, gender or sexuality they had is not relevant to their ability to do the job. And I feel it's very difficult because we get into an area of tokenism if we're not careful. And, you know, I wonder about these statistics where groups are underrepresented or overrepresented. And, you know, I feel very strongly that it is the person's technical ability to do the job. That should be absolutely paramount in this situation.
Where do you work, sir?
At Coventry. I'm the Cabinet Member for Children in Coventry, John Bundle.
Sean Bennett?
What you're saying is absolutely true, and if that was the case, then we wouldn't be having this discussion. But what social workers and people in this arena should understand better than most is the reality of human interaction. People gravitate to people who look like they do. If I come and you interview me, right? If I put it this way, I work amongst a very diverse ethnic group of people, and I find when I talk to the white boys, my accent slightly changes. I use the word nutter more than I would normally use, and I say, "How you doing, son? You all right?" They say, "Yeah, sweet, sweet, sweet." That's how I talk. If I talk to the black boys, well, go on. Touch me, and you can't help it. You gravitate to people, and what I'm saying is, as a profession, it's everybody, not you. Everybody needs to really make sure. Okay, you know, I'm a white woman of 30 years old. Try not to just connect on the fact that this woman is someone I would hang around with. Because, you know, if you speak to someone, you think, you know, I could go down a pub with you, we'll have a few jars, it'd be lovely. Do you know what I mean? That puts them ahead, and it's very hard for you to turn off your human interaction and not see them that way. If you're talking about outright racism, that's an entirely different subject. This is a far more subtle but equally as powerful phenomenon.
Given that most General Social Care Council, GSCC, conduct cases to date have been around social workers having relationships with service users. Oh, yes. Excited sounds in the front row. Do social workers need advice over what constitutes inappropriate behaviour?
I think you tell them not to have inappropriate relationships, full stop. I just don't see, you know, I mean, it is completely out of order. It is an abuse of power, it is an abuse of the relationship, and there is an issue about you can't have it both ways. You can't, you know, hold your head high as a professional organisation and then say that this kind of behaviour is acceptable.
What are we talking about? What sort of thing? Because I don't work in this field. Tell me what kind of thing is happening. I am not a social worker. I don't work in this field. But social workers that I know and have worked with for a number of years work with extremely vulnerable people. With vulnerable people where disclosure of your personal issues is incredibly important to the help that a social worker can offer. And therefore, with that disclosure takes an amount of responsibility in terms of not using it inappropriately. And it is tough. It is difficult. I mean, we're all tempted at various times. We all know that. But we also have a responsibility, a professional responsibility, to resist temptation when it occurs. And I think it's a tribute to the General Social Care Council that this is an issue that they've picked up tough on. And I congratulate them on it. Is there some sense, Howard, here... Sorry, no, Paul Snell, let me go to you. Is there some sense that... people don't quite understand the rules? I mean, that's the spirit of the question, that people need actually overt training to understand you don't make a play for the person who you're trying to help.
I'm with Naomi about this. This seems to me to be really clear. These boundaries are clear. I think the GSCC spell out the boundaries. You know, we wouldn't expect it from a doctor. You know, when we go and see a doctor, people come to social care for support, for assistance, for help, for guidance. They don't come for sexual relationships.
Yes, but there are other kinds of relationships that contain the first... I mean, you can have... It's not just about sex, is it? The help... What was it? Help, care, guidance, support. You know, that's like going out with someone. I mean, you can see how it's a very difficult area. There are grey areas here.
It's an interesting thought. I don't know whether radio presenters ask their guests out after they've been on the...
Well, we're allowed
on the radio. Very, very interesting. I mean, I think I don't know why we've got a lack of clarity about personal relationships when actually on other areas of abuse and when people step over the line, we would be really clear. If actually we were supporting someone and asked to borrow some money from their bank account or have access to their credit card or whatever, because actually we were a bit hard up and we were very friendly with them, we'd call the police. It's very clear. And suddenly, somehow, the personal relationships can be blurred. And I think we've just got to be really clear that professional relationships are professional relationships and personal relationships are personal relationships.
I mean, the original question was, do social workers need advice? I mean, if you phrase that as advice and support in you know, their professional conduct and in conducting sometimes quite relationships with clients who have quite complex issues going on, then yes, of course they need advice and support, just like any other profession that is in a power relationship with extremely vulnerable people. And I just want to make the point, this is not an issue about social work. This is an issue about any profession that has direct contact, personal contact with members of the public. Social workers are no worse in this area than any other professional, than any other profession. They know what the boundaries are. When they cross those boundaries, what a good thing. We have the GSCC and we have registration, and social work is a proper profession just like all the others. And if people cross the boundaries, well, then they have to pay the price quite right too.
Who wants to comment on this? And it's complicated stuff. Yes, in the second row.
I don't think it is that complicated.
Third row, yeah. Factual correction.
It might be worth my while pointing out to the panel that it is not straightforward, and I'm appalled at listening to your criticism, because it is not straightforward for social workers, because I personally know of a case where a social worker was disciplined for the first time ever in their working career because of what was called an inappropriate relationship, and that relationship consisted merely of a friendship with a foster carer who the GSCC deemed as someone who was akin to a service user. Now, if that is not confusing for social work staff, what is? Because it wasn't an intimate relationship, it was a friendship.
Yeah, that's exactly what I'm talking about, Paul Snell. The idea that there's a line and you don't cross it is surely too simple a way of describing things here.
I'm sorry. I'm with the GSCC on this. Foster carers are not they're not clients in the traditional sense, but they are providers of service. I don't think social workers can have relationships with foster carers. That's not the role that they have. If you want to do that, then I think you have to move away from that bit of business. That's not to say that there aren't social workers who are married to foster carers or social workers who are foster carers. But if it's your child placed with that foster carer and you want to have a relationship with them, that's not on.
Is the government showing favouritism to the children's workforce as opposed to the adults, following the announcement of £73 million invested over 3 years in the former, but nothing extra for the latter?
I do think we are now beginning to see much greater prominence being given to adult social care in this country. We have the prospect of a green paper on the future funding of care, the prospect of extra resources, and just generally the profile of care for older people, disabled adults, really going up the agenda. And I think the key thing for us is to grasp these opportunities and to take it forward. But, we've got 2 years. I think the next 2 years are going to be absolutely critical. It's not just about getting a good green paper from it. It's about attracting the resources from the next spending review. And it's about ensuring that issues in relation to adult social care are higher up the agenda in the lead up to the next election.
Naomi Eisenstadt, you can accept the praise.
And, of course, it goes to Stephen as well, because he led a lot of the campaigns that led us to do what we did. I really struggle with this one, quite honestly, because there will always be limited resources and there will always be priorities. And I've been a champion of children's issues most of my life until I moved to the Social Exclusion Task Force 18 months ago. So I'm developing a more balanced view. What I would say in terms of taxpayers' money is that there is an argument, the argument for investment in children's issues is about prevention that saves money later on. And that we have significant evidence about the relationship between the quality of the workforce, particularly in early year settings, and child outcomes, social outcomes, educational outcomes, which will, if they play through the system, save huge amounts of money, even on things like prevention of violence, prevention of social problems. So if we get it right in the early years, it should result in savings, and we're hoping that that savings can support us all when we're old, because I think we're all headed for trouble.
You know, there's going to be a national conversation about who's going to pay for care in old age, given that by the year 2050, 99% of this country is going to be over the age of 85. And so the question was a simple one: are you dreading going into a care home when you get older? And everybody is, and especially people who are at the moment 60, 65, 70 were calling up saying that. So the question, panel, is: would you be happy to receive social care services as they currently exist when you get old? Would you be happy in a care home?
I run a 60-plus day centre. I'm the chair of the trustees. And the way which we treat our old people in this country is utterly shocking. As a youth worker, I had no idea. I imagined you grow old, people were nice to you, and they helped you cross the street, and that was that. I was utterly shocked at how people are treated. I think the personalisation agenda, I personally think is a terrible thing. I think it's going to turn old people into accounts, into numbers. It's just going to be, we can afford to do it this way.
So why do you say it? Because it's all supposed to be about sort of delivering to them exactly what they want.
But it's not going to work out like that, because what happens, organisations on the other hand, they'll have to become more business-like in order to survive. They won't be getting that block funding. They're going to lose any sort of community feel, and they're just going to have to go down the route of numbers. I understand on one hand how that looks attractive, because it looks like it will foster them to provide the services that older people want. But I'm not sure that's what's going to happen. And for me, I think we've got a bigger question to answer as a society. How much do we value our older people? How much are we prepared to put in? It goes back to my other comment about the sexy end of social work. They're not the sexy end. But ultimately, we will all be there. And I think that as a society, we need to address how much money we are prepared to put into them. I spoke to an old woman on the way here who happens to be 85, and her point was, I paid my ticket, because that's referring to her tax and national insurance, her entire life, and she seemed to have got nothing out of it. She said, I wish I'd spent my life on the dole. And because then it would answer why I live in such bad conditions. And I think it's wrong to say somebody who's 40 cannot understand what somebody who's 65 is going through now. There's a common level of decency that everybody from 4 to 54 would understand.
And I think what's behind the question here, and particularly the way you asked it, Jeremy, is that expectations are changing and rising. The expectations of people who are in their 40s, 50s and 60s now are going to be much, much higher for the sort of care that they want in their old age. And I think the models of care are going to shift, they're going to change. I don't think it's the case that all care home provision is bad. There's some very good care home provision. We see some very good provision. We also see some very poor provision. But the model of care is changing. We see some really exciting innovations around the use of direct payments, the use of individual budgets, the personalisation agenda that you've been talking about today, extra care, sheltered housing, homes for life. All of those initiatives, I think, are going to change the face of how we're cared for in our old age.
We had an inspector ring us, maybe one of your inspectors, who said he'd been doing the job for 20 years. He'd only ever seen 2 homes which he would be happy in himself. 2 care homes. That surprise you?
I don't know whether it's... no, it doesn't surprise me. It doesn't surprise me, I think, because you can't... I don't think you can apply the standards of a 40-year-old into the situation of someone who is 80 and 90 now in terms of your expectations. So I can understand him saying, I wouldn't go there, I wouldn't go there. But actually, people are in different places. Whether the quality of care is good, whether the outcomes are good, is absolutely what we're about. But I think most of us in this room, in ask that question, don't consider ourselves, that don't consider that we're going to go into a care.
And thanks to our panel: Sean Bailey, Sue Bott, Stephen Burke, Naomi Eisenstadt, Mark Ivory, Polly Neat, Howard Wolfenden, and Paul Snell. Thank you as well. Great to see you all. Thank you for coming. Good night.